So, actually, somebody asked me last week if art was addictive. So I had to think about that one, but Stephen was right. I am passionate about art. And the reason I have put this image of Gauguin for two reasons. First of all, it was the first artist that I fell madly in love with when I was a child and loved his work. And secondly, because this February, through a private sale, it is rumored that one of the European royal families sold this painting to the Qatari royal family for an estimated, they're saying, 300 million US. That's a lot of money. So I have divided this presentation into three sections. The first part is I'm going to give you some guidelines that you should know about in order to build your art collection. And then secondly, we're going to look at a couple of the big, more outre artists and collectors, the big players in the international art market, because everybody has heard, I'm sure, about the Picasso painting that sold, yes, Les Femmes d'Alger, for 179 with bidder's premium included. And actually, that is also rumored to have been bought by somebody in Qatar as well. It's a really hot market for the Mid East and Asian market. And then finally, we will look at some Canadian artists. So, the first thing you need to do, if you're completely new to the art world, is to get out there and see as much art as you possibly can. And there's so many ways that you can access art. We've got the wonderful AGO downtown. If you go see the exhibitions, I remember there was a Colville exhibition, and I went 4 times to see it, because every time I go, I see something new. We also have the wonderful Art Toronto Art Fair coming up this October. There are about 100 booths there, and they're all represented by international art galleries, as well as national galleries and local galleries. And they have a reception on October the 22nd. You can go on their site. That is a really good place to go look at a lot of art. They also are holding speeches and, educational sessions as well. Of course, there's the Toronto Outdoor Exhibition. This is where you'll find a lot of the mid-range, mid-tier artists showing their work, and also a lot of emerging artists that have just been out of art school maybe for 1 year, 2 years, and they'll go in with a group and set up a booth. Then there, of course, is the GradX exhibition at OCAD. And this year, I think at the beginning of May when we had GradX, we had 10,000 people coming through looking at the work of the graduating class. It was also the 100th anniversary of OCAD. Also at OCAD we have Project 31, which is the faculty all donate art. We raised $194,000, all going towards scholarships. But more importantly, a lot of the faculty are also represented in galleries, and they have exhibition histories, as well as they are supported as well by the National Gallery in Ottawa. It's an auction, and the bidding is vigorous. So there are two other things you can look at. These are painting competitions. They have a nice purse. I know that the RBC, I think, is $25,000. And the Sobey Art Award, I think they're a pretty hefty purse as well. When you look at these two artists that I particularly like this one. I think she's had a lovely approach, with quite influenced by Chagall for some reason, the whimsical placing of the figure. But if you see something like that grabs you, one of the paintings, follow this artist's career, see what's happening, because everybody has websites. All right. Yes, online newsletters. I've put 3 there. The last one is Coastal Art Beat, and that deals with Aboriginal art, particularly out of Vancouver. But that's a very growing area now. All the art colleges have actually departments with Aboriginal studies. And also another good place for online letters is all the auction houses. Heffels, they have a fabulous catalogue on, that because they have an auction going on in Vancouver at the moment. And just you can go on and see, just pull down, you can also sign up and they will send you newsletters. So Christie's, Sotheby's, Phillips in London. And that, by the way, is from 1977 Arts Canada magazine. For some reason, I immigrated to Canada in the mid-70s, and for some reason I still have that after I almost hitting 40 years. And that is, the painting is by Ronald, let me see who it is. William Ronald, who was actually born William Ronald Smith. He dropped his surname. He's one of the founders of Painters 11, the abstract movement in Toronto in the 50s to 60s. Canadian Art. That is a wonderful magazine, covers the arts across Canada. Excuse me. I picked up a horrible flu last week. The characters on there are a Quebec art group called BLG, and they were the Canadian representative to the Venice Biennale, that just finished. And their piece, Water Velocity, is a kinetic sculpture which reproduces the effect of Olympic pool lanes, and it is going to be the centerpiece at the Toronto Pan Am Parapam Games this summer. Another source of information, this is a new initiative that started up from the University of Toronto. They are putting books about artists and art movements, Canadian, online, and you can download it for free. And these are some of the books that you can download. So it covers quite a lot. Bordeaux, and a lot of early artists as well, and of course Harold Town, that just came up recently. More about Harold Town later. Okay, I've been really zooming on ahead here. Okay, so there are actually 10 things that they say you should look out for when you are buying art. No, established. Sorry, I'm shooting ahead of myself. Okay, so after you've been out, you've seen as much art as you possibly can. What you need to, you'll start thinking about what type of collection you'd like to build. And there are 2 markets. There's the primary, which is the retail. You go into art galleries and it's modern artists. And then secondary markets, which are bought through the auction houses or for resold. You can also decide whether you want to, invest in emerging artists or whether you would prefer to have established artists. They could be historical artists from the 19th century or sort of early modern, your group of 7 going right up. And then there are different genres that you will start finding out. Maybe you just like to have landscape artists, or maybe you like figurative or abstract. And then finally, you will come up with some sort of a budget that you will think, okay, I'd like to build a collection, and what am I going to set aside each year? So what you will do when you've come up with these sort of questions in your mind, you'll start going around then to art galleries. And that's what an art dealer is. They're gallerists, and they know so much about the art world and never feel intimidated to go into an art gallery and ask all sorts of questions because that's their business. They probably know more than most people about what is going on in the art market. So, now that you have fallen in love with a work, you need to ask yourself some questions. And there are 10 points. So I've had this half written and half speaking. So Is the artwork fashionable, relevant? Will it still be important in 40 years' time? That usually in the art world is 40 to 60 years. Will it withstand the test of time? But some artworks, of course, like Surrealism and German Expressionism, which were not very popular, have now been reassessed, and they're coming on the market now, and they're starting to pick up in the prices. The same thing, I don't know if any of you follow the auction houses, but Francis Bacon, the English painter, 12 years ago, one of his painting of Lucian Freud, the triptych, sold for 8 million. And in 2013, it sold for 143 million. So for some reason, Francis is very popular. Exhibition history. Has the work made its mark in the art world? Well, if it's been looped in as maybe a show with the AGO, that is really good. Does the artist have romantic baggage? There are really two things that just drive it. For example, you need to die young. The mythology of the artist, like Egon Schiele. You die young. Or else, what is really good, you go mad, like Vincent van Gogh. That's what's called romantic baggage. Okay, so is the painting from a desirable phase in the artist's body of work? For example, Riopelle, his best period was sort of 1950 to 55. Is it typical? Well, if you buy a Manet, if you invest in a Manet, we think of Manet and we think of his water lilies. So if you buy a Manet, you want to make sure that anybody walking into the room is going to know that you have a Manet on the wall. That will be more typical of an artist's work, body of work, than, let's say, Manet did a still life. Does the painting have wall power? I love that art term. They say actually the most popular colors are blues and reds, but it's the whole composition and the color scheme. When you walk into a room, does it have a great impact on you? Because there are some art pieces that do that to you. For example, Massacre of the Innocents, the Rubens that's at the AGO that Ken Thompson bought and donated. That was one of the first paintings in an art gallery at the Tate when I saw it at the Tate 15 years ago that just totally blew me away. It's not a very popular subject because sort of death is not a popular subject in art, but it's just so beautifully handled, the paint. It's sensual writhing. So wall power is very important. The subject, yes. Pretty women and children are good. You better have a beautiful young nude as opposed to an old, cribbly old woman. Sorry, Alice Neal, if anybody knows the New York artist Alice Neal. Sunny landscapes, nice calm waters, these are really nice subjects. Is it in good condition? Well, when you buy a work, you are totally entitled to speak to the gallerist and say, I'd like to inspect it. You take it out of its frame, you hold it up, you put it under a blue light, because there's always, sometimes when older paintings are restored, it can be overpainted, clumsy. So one has to make sure that it is in good condition. Finally, the provenance or the history of the painting. Who owned it? Which gallery was it sold? Was it ever in a public collection? That is very important. Finally, is it authentic? I don't know if any of you read or remember reading in the Globe and Mail last month, about a month ago, 10 oil sketches by J.E.H. MacDonald, apparently that were dug up, exhumed in his back garden by his son Thoreau, were then subsequently sold to a collector family here in Toronto. They died. Their heirs donated the 10 works to the Vancouver Art Gallery. Well, it was authenticated by the senior curator at the VAG and also by Dennis Reed, who was a noted curator, formerly worked at the AGO. So they authenticated, but everybody, a lot of dealers and collectors who obviously own McDonald's work said, this seems wrong. And quite frankly, the idea of Mr. McDonald digging a hole in the ground and putting 10 oil sketches in is odd. So what the VAG have done is they have brought in the Canadian Conservation Institute, and they're running a whole bunch of tests on materials, and we shall have the results, whether they decide it's authentic, next year. Modigliani. This is a real fabulous story that absolutely has rocked the art world. Again, it's in February. A lot of things happen in February. In February this year, a man by the name of Mr. Yves Bouvier, who lives in Monaco, went to visit a client of his. The client is a Russian oligarch, and Mr. Bouvier had, over the past 10 years, helped the Russian oligarch amass a collection worth $2 billion US. This collection actually doesn't hang on walls. It is stored in a high security vault, and it just sits there until it's resold again. So Mr. Bouvier rang the doorbell. He hadn't even crossed the threshold of the door because he wanted to sell. Actually, it was a Rothko, right? It was a Rothko that he wanted to sell. He was arrested. He was arrested and later charged with money laundering and price fixing. So you have Rybolovlev, that was the name of the Russian oligarch. So you have to backtrack. So this was in February this year. 2 months earlier, Mr. Rybolovlev was having lunch with another art dealer in the fabulous Eden Rock Hotel in Cannes, in the south of France. And during the conversation, it was revealed that this painting, Nu Couché, by Modigliani, had actually been sold for $80 million by Steve Cohen, but Mr. Rybolovlev had paid $120 million. Now that is a hell of a spread. So hence the charges against Monsieur Bouvier. Monsieur Bouvier's defense is that he was not acting as an agent, he was acting as a dealer. And he had plenty of other clients who could have bought it. The important thing about this whole case, which has absolutely rocked the art world, is that it has cast a stark light on how masterpieces, wonderful bodies, wonderful artworks are bought and sold in the international market. And they are typically, they say it's about 50 people in the world that play for that high stakes game. And also Mr. Bouvier owns all these free ports, which are these high security vaults where artists is bought, and it's usually through a series of transactions via offshore companies, and then it's stored in these high security vaults called free ports, and they're tax-free zones. And free ports, there's one in Luxembourg, there's one in Switzerland, especially now since the banks have to be a bit more transparent. There is one in Hong Kong, Beijing, Singapore. Mr. Bouvier is also a principal shareholder in these free ports. So anyway, everybody's waiting to find out what's going to happen. Must be a hell of a backstory to that one. Okay. I thought, actually, now we're on this, I thought what I would do is talk about a couple of artists in the international art market. And I have chosen Damien Hirst. Because Damien Hirst is one of the very few international artists who can claim to have altered the art world's concept of what art and an art career can be. In September 2008, when Lehman Brothers was announced its bankruptcy, Damien Hirst held an exhibition, an auction, through Sotheby's of not secondary work, but primary work. And no artist has ever done this, and no auction house has ever sold primary work. Anyway, it was enormously successful. This piece here is called "The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living." It was commissioned by Charles Saatchi. It was commissioned in 1991. So, Mr. Saatchi paid Damien Hirst approximately $75,000 and bought the shark from him. Fast forward to 2005, Mr. Saatchi then sells this artwork to Steve Cohen, who's an American hedge fund owner. The shark in the intervening years was in a bit of a sorry state. $12 million in 2005 was more money than had ever been paid for a living artist's work other than Jasper Johns. But the shark in 2005 was not in good shape. A fin had fallen off, its skin had turned all old and wrinkly and a sort of an icky pale green, and the formaldehyde in the tank had turned murky. In the words of Professor Don Thompson from York University, the shark had begun to look as if we were entering Norman Bates's fruit cellar and finding Mother embalmed in her chair. Mr. Cohen, being a man of great wealth and, making good decisions, actually got rid of that shark and just demanded a whole new shark. Subsequently to that, Damien produced 9 more sharks, the most expensive of which was $17 million. That's savvy. This one. Damien's mother is a good Catholic Irish lady, and when she first heard of this project, she said, "For the love of God." So, being the good son, that's what he has named this piece. Okay, it is a life-size platinum cast of a human skull from an 18th century Portuguese sailor. Human teeth from the original skull were added. It was fabricated by a Bond Street jeweler in London, and reportedly for 21 million US. The skull is encrusted with just over 8,000 industrial diamonds, and on the forehead is embedded a single large pear-shaped pink diamond. Hirst's London dealer offered the work for 88 million US. Nobody bought it. So it was eventually sold to a consortium which consisted of Hirst, his art dealer, and Frank Dunphy, who is from Phillips Auction House. In 2011, the offering price was 154 million. We do not know if it's been sold. Right, so Damien is a very prolific painter, and these are some of the works. The spot and spin paintings, let's look at them. I particularly like the spin paintings. What he does is takes a canvas, puts it on a potter's wheel, swirls it around and throws paint at it. Now, I think he did the first 4 or 5, but now subsequently there have been like hundreds of them, and they are done by his technicians. He describes this as childish in the positive sense of the word. The spot paintings are again done by technicians, and each of them are given a pharmaceutical name. This one is called abalone acetone powder. Apparently these were, Damien went to New York and he had a whole bunch of New York guys do the spot paintings, and apparently in the early 90s they were selling for $350 US, and they're now about 12 to 15. Moving on in the art world. This one. This one is by a chap by the name of Maurizio Catalan. He's Italian. He is a neo-Dadaist. There are a lot of those in the art world. Maurizio Catalan never went to art school, and he but has produced, quite a lot of work. This one is called Stephanie. Maurizio was sitting down with his dear friends, new best friends in their Connecticut house, the Peter Brandt and his wife, the supermodel called Stephanie Seymour. And he looked around and saw all these hunting trophies all on the walls. And then he looked at the beautiful, luscious Stephanie and said, why don't we do something like this? So he was commissioned to do the piece. 4 editions were made, and he got Madame Tussauds in London to make them because Maurizio does not do any of work. He just comes up with the idea. There are a lot of artists like that. Jeff Koons, you might have heard of, the New York artist who does all those balloon dogs, highly polished balloon dogs. They come up with the concept and they have their technicians make it. This one is affectionately known as the Trophy Wife, 2.4 million back in the 90s. This is the same Peter Brandt. This one is really weird. This one is done by a Swiss, again another neo-Dadaist, called Urs Fischer. And in 2007, Urs Fischer jackhammered through the floor of Gavin Brown's West Village Gallery in New York, leaving a massive pile of dirt he called You. The tomb's a fine and mighty place, but none do there, I think. So this is a grave. So Peter Brandt, the same one who commissioned the Trophy Wife, he bought it. It comes in an edition of 1, and the price is unknown. And what he did was, to take it from the gallery, he had Urs Fischer come and supervise to make a duplicate You on the grounds of his Connecticut home. And that is Mr. Brandt with his daughter by Stephanie Seymour. Now we're going to calm ourselves down and come to painting in Canada. Again, this was in the mid-70s when I came. This is a fabulous book. The prose style is wonderful. Dennis Reed has since updated it because this only goes to about the mid-70s, into the early 80s, and then he passes on. But it's a wonderful, wonderful book. This is the most expensive artwork that is ever sold in Canada for $5.1 million. It was bought by Lord Thompson. And it is by, he was originally from Ireland, Paul Kane, but it's typical of what was being produced in Canada in the 18th century, turning into the 20th. They were historical paintings, primarily in Quebec, a lot of Dutch. They call them actually expensive, muddy paintings. This is Mr. Lefroy, who discovered the magnetic field in the North Pole, and this is an homage to him and his achievements. This is actually now in the AGO here in Toronto. I've chosen James Maurice, which he and another painter called Lyman, John Lyman, had a fabulous show at the McMichael Gallery. And I've chosen this one because it was, it's a whole transition away with what was typically happening in the Canadian art scene. He was very much influenced by what was happening in France, the whole aesthetic movement that was taking place in France. And Maurice actually did a lot. He was originally from Montreal, and he traveled. He spent most of his career in France and North Africa, as well as the Caribbean. It's amazing how many Canadian artists have traveled down to the Caribbean. John MacDonald also was one that stayed in Barbados for 3 months, taking in the good airs for his health. But I love this painting. It's deliciously handled, the paint, and it's a small piece. I'm showing you a couple of women artists that are very undervalued in the market. This is by a lady called Florence McGillivray. She was, again, a very prolific painter. They say for women to succeed in the art world, they have to never get married, do not have children, be totally greedy and selfish about your life, otherwise you will not make it. artists, men artists can have muses and people looking after them. She is important, and actually if anybody has one of these in their attic, please let me know, because I know lots of people who would love to collect her. She, the McGillivray and the Tom Thompson's family were good friends. They had all roughly immigrated from Scotland at about the same time. And she actually painted with Tom Thompson. And I love this one because it's got that Thompson feel to it. You know the studio on Elmer Avenue in Toronto that Lauren Harris and Mr. McCallum built, going down the Rosedale Valley Road? Yes, they worked in there, and Florence had a studio in there. Emily Carr, of course, how absolutely fabulous. I saw her exhibition in the Dulwich Gallery in London, and it's interesting because they now have the group, I think it's the group of 7 now at the Dulwich, and it's really exposing Canadian art to the international market, and they're very well received. But this next artist, Lawrence Paul Yawalupton, who is from BC, is a graduate of Emily Carr. This is his critical response to it. This one is called Burying Another Face of Racism on First Nations Soil. I just think the graphics and everything is just, I would love to own paintings like this. This is huge. It's about 20 feet by 12, and it's hanging in the Vancouver Art Gallery. Prudence Heward is from what they call, which started up by A.Y. Jackson, the Montreal Beaver Hall Hill Group, a group of women all painting in the 20s, 30s. They didn't last long as a community, but they were some fine women artists, and this is just a beautiful painting, which is why it's up there. And I'm showing you sort of a section of these works because they're still actually, they're about the 15,000, 10,000 level that you can still, they're affordable as opposed to like 154 million. This is another woman. She was married, actually, but her husband was also an artist, Molly Lamb. She was actually born in Vancouver, but ended up her days in Fredericton. Jack Bush. I put this one up because Heffel Auction House is having their auction tonight in Vancouver, and this is one of the pieces that's up for auction. And the estimate on this Jack Bush is $250,000 to $350,000. A really great catalog. There are a lot of Krieghoffs there, a lot of, Haroldtown. When I came to Canada, my first job here was working for the architect Arthur Erickson in his Toronto office when he was doing the new Massey Hall and the subway stations. And I just met all these artists were coming in because Arthur liked collecting. So Haroldtown was quite the character. I'm showing you this one because this is also in the Heffel auction tonight, and it's been valued at, the estimate is between 9,000 and 12,000. Come back. There. Now the reason, think of Damien Hirst and his paintings, right, with the potter's wheel, his spin paintings. Well, these are called snap paintings, and these were all done like 25 years before Damien was snapping. What Harold did was he would load a whole bunch of paint on a taut string over the canvas, pull it back, snap it. Tony Tascona, a Manitoban artist, recently died. He was the first artist in Canada to paint on aluminium. He used aluminum. I can't do it because aluminum. He worked in the, I know, English. He worked in the aeronautics industry, and so it's an interesting support. So that's why I put him up. And also, it gives a beautiful translucency to the paints. This is lovely. These are wall hangings. They are textile works. And again, I just think they're absolutely exquisite. I love the graphic element in it, the whole design of them. This is an Alex Colville. It is also on the Heffel's auction tonight. It's estimated at 40 to 60,000. And actually they say that paintings that have cows in them are really not popular at all. People don't like them. But what is interesting about this is that it is part of a study towards Colville's 1955 painting Cattle Show. One of my favorite painters in Canada, Jean-Paul Lemieux. When we're talking about authentic, I went on a certain auction house online, I will not say the name, but it wasn't Heffel's. And I saw advertised two lithos by Jean-Paul Lemieux for $800 each. And I thought, my God, that's so odd. So I said, that's very strange because a friend of mine actually just sold a Lemieux privately for 1.5 million a couple of weeks ago. So 800 for a litho, I do not think so. So I called another friend of mine who's an appraiser, and I said, what gives? You know, it's too good to be true. So apparently it was a mechanical, she said, Virginia, it's a mechanical reproduction. The only thing authentic about it, if in fact it is his signature. So that's why you have to be very careful. But I put him up because I love his sense of decorum, and I like his sort of anecdotal, you know, references to Quebec folklore and culture. But the sense of decorum is beautiful. All right. Doris McCarthy. Doris McCarthy just recently died, 100 years old. Her works are just beautiful. Again, she was a woman painter that traveled all over. She painted from Newfoundland. She painted across to BC. She went down to California. She's been to the Caribbean. She's produced a beautiful body of work. And some people say, you know, with her icebergs and everything, maybe now that we're going into climate warming, this might be sort of like a little political in. A young artist born in Prague, graduate of University of Alberta. Again, you know, just that sort of uneasy, edgy sort of feel. He's in galleries and, let me see, yeah. No, he's just sort of an emerging mid-career artist. John Hartman, Ontario painter. I love his work, these aerial views bringing in sort of the personal narrative. It's a sort of, you know, the city as a living organism, and they're beautifully, lusciously painted. Brian Jungen. I was in St. John's, Newfoundland at the Rooms, and I walked in, and there was a flying skeleton of a pterodactyl hung up on the roof. Well, it must be about 40 feet long, and it was made up of stacked plastic chairs. Like, how cool is that to take something that is so horrible to look at aesthetically and create this beautiful object out of them? So he's really cool. That's real human hair, and the other parts are made out of Nike shoes. I'm finishing this with two of my teachers at OCAD, one of John Scott. He's represented by Nicholas Metavier. He's a working class man. He grew up in Windsor. Actually, he's apparently been zapped by lightning 3 times, so I wonder if that's romantic baggage. He is not an attractive child, but he's always swanning around with gorgeous women on his arm. So, and I like his work very much. Finally, Robert Hoole, who is a Manitoban First Nations. Love his work, a fabulous teacher. I learned so much from him. This is from, obviously I got too excited, everything is flipped all over the place. Okay, oh yeah. This is called Parfleche for the Last Supper. Parfleche or saddlebags that the plains natives used that stored meat or pemmican and their medicines. So why this piece is important is because Robert said it was the first piece that he did that he was not influenced by anybody. He just tapped right back into his heritage. There are 13 pieces in this body of work, and they are all made out of handmade paper, and they're decorated with porcupine quills. They represent the Last Supper. The one on the left is Judas Iscariot, and the one on the right is Jesus Christ. Finally, I've just put up some references that you might like to look at. I'll just point out one book. If you really do not know anything about the art world, Alan Bryce, who's a Toronto dealer, Art Smart, it's sort of a 101, but really good to start off with, because it talks about, what art speak is and sort of demystifies and decodes art talk. The Financial Times article, you can Google it, Cynthia Omurchu, that's online. And the rest of them are just books, The Supermodel and the Brillo Box. Don Thompson is an economist. He teaches at the Schulich School of Business at York University. And his books, you just gobble them up. They're so beautifully written. 7 Days in the Art World, Sarah Thornton. She's also done another one. She's originally Canadian, did her PhD, and now is based in England. And, of course, Dennis Reed's A Concise History of Canadian Painting. Thank you.